Anyway, thank you very much, Cal, and to everybody who's still here. No, it's an honor, and truth be told, it's also my 40th anniversary coming up in a couple weeks. So I feel like somehow connected to the school. So, preparing for the lecture for school gave me the excuse to think about when I was in school in your position, and it reminded me of an experience that I had, which might be a little bit similar to some of yours, and I wanted to share the experience.
There we go.
Good. All right, this is just to distract you from my little storytelling, but this is a photo of our model shop in Genoa. But the story is a little bit my story, and then one of my first experiences at architecture school is that I came to architecture by way of structural engineering. I followed in my father's footsteps, who's an engineer, and I went to the same school and actually started working for him. And the idea was to work for the firm. But I found that while I loved engineering and I love how exact the work is, I started to get a little bit curious about things that were outside of the scope of engineering, which was, I find, a little bit narrow. So I started to think about things like, what a building looks like and how you design, how it's organized. And I thought, well, I'm 28 years old, and if I'm lucky, I have to work for another 50 years. So I could go to architecture school for 4 years and work for 46 years, and for those 46 years decide whether I want to do architecture, engineering, or a combination of both. So I thought it was worth the risk. And up until that point, my job, as an engineer is to solve problems given to me, right? Make a building stand out, or find the efficient load path and pick the proper member cross-section. But then I arrived to school, and my first studio project had nothing to do with buildings, to my surprise. And I'm sure you guys might remember some projects like this if you've already been through your first semester. But the project had to do with, thinking creatively and imaginatively. And as one of my professors used to tell me, I don't know how often in my first year, to suspend my disbelief. And the project was to create something out of paper, and I could only cut it and fold it, and something about repetition. And I had no idea what they wanted me to do. I kept asking my professor, well, what am I supposed to build? What problem am I supposed to solve? And she kept telling me, whatever you want. It's up to you to decide, And I was lost. And I struggled, and I made something, as you see, and I got to the final review. I put it on the floor, and I had nothing intelligent to say about it. I stood there, I didn't know this is what I made, and there was a guest critic there, and I never will forget what he said, and he probably could tell I was lost and frustrated with the process already. And he said, Kevin, architects aren't supposed to solve problems. We're supposed to create them. I thought, what is this guy talking about? And I remember standing there thinking, looking at my classmates who I didn't know yet, and all these professors and guest critics, and I thought to myself, my dad was right all along. These architects are completely nuts. But I persevered, because I couldn't go back, on what I said, and I went through a few more awkward reviews, some good. I did end up graduating. And 10 years later, I made it here. One thing led to another, and I got to land a job at Renzo Piano Building Workshop. And now I've finished school, and I've been working with Renzo and everybody else at the office, and I now understand what the point was of that critique, of that comment. And the point is that architects are the people in the team that are responsible for the big picture, for the large questions. We are the ones that are defining, what the problem is that everybody else on the team are going to help solve. And we're in this position because it's our responsibility as the architect to understand and then in turn design the intangible and unscientific aspects of the project. You know, questions like, should we even build this building? Or if we build a tower over here, what is it going to do to the neighborhood of single-family homes over there? Or, you know, how do I make a building such that a young kid, you know, on his first day of school is excited and comfortable, as opposed to petrified and homesick? And those aren't the questions for the general contractors and the engineers and the consultants. Those are the questions of architects, or for architects. And this is inside our office in Genoa, and this is where we think about those questions. And by investigating them, we define the specific problem for the specific site and the specific purpose of each project, that then the rest of the team, which is hundreds and hundreds of people, as we've heard in the other comments today already, come together to solve. And the point is that we as architects have to consider everything that has to do with people and the earth and blend it together. In 1998, Renzo was awarded the Pritzker Prize, and in his acceptance speech he said this. He said, I'm going to quote here, "Architecture mixes things up. History and geography, anthropology and the environment, science and society, and inevitably mirrors all of them." And then he went on to say, "Architecture is like an iceberg. In the 7/8 of the iceberg that lies below the water, we find the forces that push architecture up and allow the tip to emerge. Science, society, and art." I titled this lecture Poetry, Civility, and Constructability because these are the values with which we apply to all of our projects. The idea of creating problems, or actually defining problems, is what brought me to the concept of poetry. You know, for every project, the architect has to look for the poetic potential and then figure out how to create it. For my purposes, I want to borrow a specific definition of poetry that I found, and it reads as follows. Poetry is a form of literature that uses aesthetic and rhythmic qualities of a language to evoke meaning in addition to or in place of the prosaic ostensible meaning. So in other words, poetry creates meaning beyond the obvious. And the word poetry, I looked into it a little bit, and poetry is actually a derivative of an ancient Greek term, poiesis, which relates to the activity of making. And the philosophers have used this in their discourse. And in philosophy, the definition of poiesis is a concept that defined as the activity in which a person brings something into being that did not exist before. So I thought it was perfect for what we do. And in philosophical discourse, poiesis is used as a term to differentiate from another term, which is a derivative of ancient Greek, which is technique, which means to craft or craftsmanship. I'll get to that in a second. But to continue along with the analogy of language here, if the language of architecture is made up of the words with which we build, then poetry occurs in architecture when we put together our building blocks to evoke a mood or a feeling that's beyond the prosaic function of the structure or the shelter. So this is the part of the job that architects do that's for the immeasurable and intangible and unscientific concepts, right, or the ideas. And what I mean is when we close our eyes at the beginning of a project and try to imagine the desired characteristics of our future space or place, things like atmosphere and beauty and sense of curiosity and delight and even harmony, and even more specifically contextual harmony and proportion, things like texture, light and shadow, temperature, air, the turbulence or the stillness of a place. These are the unquantifiable characteristics that I'm calling poetry. And the previous slide was the conceptual model for this building here, which is the Paul Klee Museum in Bern, Switzerland. But now I want to take you to a project as an example in Paris. This project was completed in 2014. I'm hiding it right now. That's not done in 2014. It's for the Pathé Foundation, which is dedicated to the preservation of Pathé, which is a company where at the beginning of the 20th century they were the largest film equipment manufacturer and production company. You may know them. And I love this project because of its contextual harmony and its geometry and complexity and materiality. I didn't work on it. I wish I did. But it also has a lot of surprises that I'm going to show you. It was, the building contains the archives and an exhibition space and a screening room and offices. And it was built on not an easy site, not even Parisian standards. It's on a historical block in the 13th district, where a mid-19th century theater once stood, and it's behind this elevation of this facade that was decorated by young Auguste Rodin. So here's a sketch, early sketch of some concepts from Renzo. And the ideas are not only to encapsulate all the necessary functions, but also to create something surprising and perhaps unexpected, or maybe gives a sense of curiosity from the street, and maybe is a little theatrical. So this sketch shows from the elevation some kind of strange object flying behind the buildings, poking its head out. And I'm going to get to this project later to also show you how it was built. But for now, I just want to show how this is sort of the problem definition that then is solved by the team. And here is that strange and foreign object sleeping in the courtyard between all of its neighbors, to whom it has no direct resemblance. It doesn't look like the buildings around it, but I think if you look at it long enough, it does feel as though it belongs. And this is because there is a harmony with its form and materiality and scale and its surrounding buildings. And while I think it's pretty great from the outside, this is it on the inside. I heard Renzo recently call this being inside the belly of the whale. And then another surprise is in the evening, from the other side, from the courtyard. And then here it is a little closer. So now I want to go a little further away. This is a project which predates my time at Renzo Piano Building Workshop, but I think it could be one of the most beautiful and poetic that the offices have done. This is 8,000 miles away from here, if you go west. And it's very difficult to visit, so it's another reason why I thought it'd be interesting to show to you guys. And it's on a group of islands called New Caledonia, which is in the South Pacific, about halfway between Australia and New Zealand. And it also happens to be a French territory. And in the 1980s, there was an agreement between New Caledonia and France, such that the French would aid in economic development for the next 10 years. And I think subsequently they've been making up further agreements. But at this point in time, that also included funding a large cultural center dedicated to the indigenous people there, known as the Kanaki. And the project is called the Jean-Marie Gibao Cultural Center, named after one of the freedom fighters, leaders. And this is the setting. And in a place like this, and with a purpose as delicate as to honor and preserve and to promote the cultural heritage of the Kanaki, it was imperative to balance the modern building technology with the spirit of the people and the place. So Renzo and the team took a look at the local traditions, the vernacular structures, and the arts and crafts, not to mimic or quote them, but to learn from them and to understand the richness and the temporality that exists in their culture. So then the question became, how to create a large building for this big cultural center, but also maintain the scale of the vernacular and keep an intrinsic or create an intrinsic bond to the people and the place. And here are a couple early sketches. The plan on the left and the section on the right. And there were some simple ideas about breaking up the scale, relating the placement of the building to the prevailing winds, which always come off the ocean. They have monsoon winds that always come from the same direction. And also, how does the building form relate to the ephemerality of the winds and the ocean? And finally, this was sort of the final concept sketch, which is the problem defined in a way, which shows the building playing with nature, playing with le soleil, the sun, the vent, the wind, and even an idea of maybe these buildings could make a little sound of their own when the wind blows through them. And then, of course, on the left side here, you see the importance of the vegetation. So again, this is what we wanted to do. And then this is what was created. This is actually the group of buildings from the windward side, from the Pacific. And here they are in their context, a little closer. And finally, from above, on the other side, you see that it is actually 10 buildings now, connected all by this long street or corridor. Each building is monothematic, containing either an exhibition space or an education classroom, a performance space, and even art-making spaces. And there's another project I'm going to show a little bit about the construction later, but for now I think it's fair to say that we can read here the aesthetic and rhythmic qualities of the architectural language as having created meaning beyond the prosaic shelter for the cultural center, as well as evoking the spirit of the Kanaki, their culture and their history. So, now I want to move on to my third concept of civility. If you look at RPBW projects, you typically see that we do museums and concert halls and some commercial buildings like the Schorn or the Krause Gateway Center in Des Moines. And the reason for this is because we love to do public buildings. And even on the non-public buildings, we like to look for ways we can design public spaces as a byproduct of the program. And as with poetry, I want to use the word civility in a sort of particular way, not really like how we use it nowadays to be politeness and courtesy, but more tied to the Latin root word civilis, which means pertaining to the civis, or the citizen. So as Cal mentioned before, working in Iowa, in Des Moines, I was working on the Whitney Museum of American Art in New York City. You see this, the north elevation, looking south. And as a museum, by definition, the building is public. But even here, and true to the Italian roots of our office, and we believe in the positive influence that a public space or a piazza can have on civic life. So even here, we decided to create public space outdoors or outside of the museum for everybody to enjoy, not just the museum goers. Here's a site plan with the Highline Park, which is an elevated park on an old train track on the right-hand side, and the west side is the river and the West Side Highway. And if you look at the site plan, you can see that the interior space of the lobby and the exterior space are more or less equal in size. And also that the the entrance to the museum was pulled about 2/3 of the way down to the left, away from the main intersection with Gansevoort and Washington Streets and the base of the High Line where all the people are. And the idea was to drag people across our elongated piazza, which we call a largo, which is Italian for a wide street. And in section, you can see that the building is essentially levitating above the street level. And the upper floors are the green floors are the art galleries, and then the blue floors are the administration offices. And the soffit above the lobby is sloping up towards the High Line, and that's so that we have unobstructed views to the High Line from the restaurant and from the High Line through the museum. And I personally was drawing that angle so that you could stand on the High Line and look under the building and still catch the river. And the idea was also to create complete transparency at that ground floor, so that there was no visual barrier between inside and outside. And the effect of all of this is that the lobby and the store and the museum shop and the restaurant become all part of the public realm. And it kind of blends with the largo. So this means that the lobby and the museum on the ground floor and the largo are a place where people can come and meet and gather and tell stories and sit and then have lunch and get together in a way that has not necessarily anything to do with the museum itself. But what it has to do with is augmenting the quality of civic life in the neighborhood. And it also makes the museum much more welcoming to everyone. And sometimes when things are done, I think they look a little obvious. So I'm going to make a comparison, just 1 second, to the previous Whitney Museum. Don't take it as a criticism, because I don't want to criticize this building. It's an excellent building. But I want to show it just to compare the design at the street level. And this is great. It was designed by Marcel Breuer and completed in 1966. This is where the Whitney Museum moved from. But it was designed at a different time with different goals. And if you contrast the street level, you can see here what the impact of our architectural decisions have within our projects, within our site. What that impact can be on the civic nature beyond the property line. And when we at RPBW do projects in an urban environment, we always consider that it's an opportunity to better the public realm. And it's important to remember that sometimes that can be achieved by the carefully designed absence of architecture. We want our projects not only to serve the purposes of our clients and the inhabitants of the buildings, but also the city at large, the population at large. And the thing is, once the decision to build a building has been made, there's no question of whether it will have an effect on the world. You know, maybe you live across the street, or maybe it's on the way to work, but the question that remains is only whether or not the building will be a positive or a negative addition to the world. And that's the risk of architecture. It's very imposing. And we think that it's our responsibility then as architects to think beyond the program and beyond our site. And even something I've learned from working with Renzo is to think beyond the present time. And even think beyond the near future. Renzo and some of the partners of the firm are from Genoa, Italy, which I believe is still I think it has the largest medieval city center still in existence in Europe. And some of the buildings are from the 8th century. And here is the Roman Catholic Church of San Matteo, which was founded in 1125. This building was on its second renovation by the 16th century. And The original RPBW office, before we got to the coast there, which is about 20 miles west, it was in the second floor of the building you see here on the left, on the Piazza San Mateo. And therefore, when these guys were going to work about 40 years ago, young architects, they're looking out the window, they're seeing a building that was 900 years old. Therefore, this concept of civility is ingrained in us to also mean for the future citizens, which also means that we need to be good stewards of the environment, and we need to think about the resources that we use to make our buildings, and the resources that are required to operate them. I know there's a lot of discussion nowadays about the impact that buildings have on the environment, but I see headlines like this from a couple months ago, in the Washington Post, and it's nevertheless still shocking. And the thing is, architecture is a game where every move has an effect for centuries. So again, we need to try to make our projects a positive addition for the world for as long into the future as we can imagine, and then a lot further. So, our best exemplar of these sustainability values, I believe, is the California Academy of Sciences project, which is in Golden Gate Park in San Francisco. This project was completed in 2008, and it contains a planetarium, an aquarium, a natural history museum, and it's all under this undulating living roof. There's something like 2 million plants that were planted on this roof, and together the plants with the soil and the water retention and the long overhangs and the natural ventilation, which is created by these operable skylights, all come together to eliminate the need for air conditioning on the ground floor because of the natural ventilation. Here is a shot just quickly from the inside. You can see the skylights, and those skylights look like this from on top of the roof. You see a few of them are open. And the building has these long overhangs at the front, which are glass, but they have integrated photovoltaic cells. And it's just an example of a public building designed for a great purpose, an important purpose, but also to minimize its impact on the environment. So now we can talk about constructability. And constructability is a value that is deep in the DNA of our studio. It is passed down literally through the genes of Renzo's family. His father and his uncles were all builders. And here again is another photo of our model shop in Genoa. And as Cal mentioned, Renzo's love for building is also in the name. There's a reason why it's not the Renzo Piano Architects or Associates. It's the Renzo Piano Building Workshop. And the point is, the reason is because our point, or the purpose that we look for on every project is that it ends up getting built. We don't like to do paper architecture or theoretical architecture if we can, because we always want to create something useful. And in that same speech that Renzo gave when he accepted the Pritzker Prize, he defined architecture in this way. He said, architecture is a service in the most literal sense of the term. It is an art that produces things that serve a purpose. And to produce those purposeful things, we need a huge team. Not just architects and engineers and our consultants, but also the construction managers, the tradespeople, the factory workers, the transportation specialists, the arborists. The list can go on forever. And I want to stress this point, and actually I'm echoing the point that was made earlier about teamwork to the students, because it is essential in the way we work. And when you go out as architects, it's not enough to simply be the author of the music. You have to also be the conductor of a huge orchestra. And it's equally as important to listen to your clients, and have an open discourse, and to your consultants and your construction managers and builders. And just like here, what we're looking at is an image from the early 80s, which I kind of love, which is Renzo sitting on the ground in the backyard in Genoa, and the engineer Peter Rice to his left, working on full-scale details, almost maybe full-scale details, on the roof structure for the Menil collection in Houston, Texas. And here's an image of a typical workshop meeting in our office today. It's the same process of having architects with engineers and builders all together around the table, giving their input, some with 30 years experience and some with 30 weeks experience. And those details that were drawn with a little team in the backyard of Genoa eventually became an engineered system through that teamwork, and then became a manufacturing process, and then eventually becomes the architectural device, modulating the light in the museum, creating a beautiful space to enjoy and contemplate the artwork. And now, like teamwork, I want to make a point about practical experience. The thing is, we can't do our job without understanding the forces of nature and the exigencies of construction. You need a deep understanding of the process which is required to create your vision, to realize your poetic vision. And sometimes, often, more than you might think now, you need to know these things so that you can guard against those who will say that what you want to do cannot be done. And that'll happen often. Frank Lloyd Wright once said something in an interview that I really like, so I'm going to quote him here. And this was also his advice to some students. He said, "Don't think that when you are in a drafting room that that's your golden moment, because it isn't. Your golden moment is all the time, when you are in service and when you are in action and doing things. This is a kind of learning by doing." And I couldn't agree more with that statement. I wouldn't be here today doing my job if I didn't start out when I was younger, 19 years old, working as an assistant to a superintendent, faxing RFIs, requests for information, to the design team because somehow there were discrepancies in the drawings. Not our drawings, but it happens. So I'd like to urge the students, when you're in school and coming out of school, that you should seek internships or jobs that have a lot of field experience, or field work if you can. Or even go and work for a contractor or subcontractor, at least once. It will help your work immensely. Okay, so I'm going to show now some examples of how these buildings were built. And I'm going to go kind of quickly just to give a little bit of hints on the big picture construction moves. But I'd be happy to answer questions when we're done, because I'm honestly skipping over a lot of very good information. But here we're going to go back to Paris on the Avenue des Gobelins in front of the Fondation Sept. And here's a section of the building so you can understand it now a little bit better. There's a longitudinal section with the historical facade on the left and the little courtyard on the right with the trees. And you can see that all the opaque spaces, let's say the spaces that don't need windows, are on the lower half. That's the archives, the exhibition space for the film equipment. And then the office space is the one that's up above, underneath that glass bubble. And the screening room is in the basement. So this lower portion was actually became a concrete structure. It's this strange form that's very organic, and the team of engineers and general contractors and concrete subtrades came together to figure out how to do a shotcrete structure and create these steel ribs to generate the form to tie the rebar to, and eventually cast the concrete. And you get this. And this is, you see this is levitating also above the courtyard and attaching to these buildings, which are hundreds and hundreds of years old. And it's waiting for the glass and bubble and glue lamp structure above, which you see here. So this whole bubble was built and erected by one company, a facade contractor by the name of Frenner and Reiffer, out of Italy. And I just want to point out that the decision by the construction team to put the entire structure, including the glue laminated wood beams, in their scope of work was very critical. And it's not architecture per se, but coming out of the problem that we defined, the teams came up with this creative solution, and Frenner and Reiffer went out and had to become mini experts on glue lam and subcontract to another, to a glue lam expert, because it's not normal. Normally, curtain wall guys are working with steel or aluminum. But what it did was it created a way for, I'll go back to the other previous slide quickly. It created a way to simplify the construction and a way to delineate exactly in one position the line between the concrete subcontractor and their work and the facade work. So you see on the right image, there's this gray pipe going around the ring. And that's where all of the tolerances and all the discussion between one trade and the other was handled, and then everything else was one system. And that's just an example of us saying we want to create a block that's really interesting, but you got to work with everybody else to get there. And here is the same shot, but with the glass. And this is double curved insulated glazing units, and a leave out for the crane, for the tower crane, which is common, but it's in a project like this, it's not easy to do. It takes the engineering and of the facade contractor and the fabricator and the erector and the general contractors all to come together, and the architect to be orchestrating this and saying you need to get it right, and it has to be then pre-engineered so that the glue lam beams can be cantilevering, and so that you can raise all the pieces after the crane is gone from below. So these guys, you can see actually in this image the beginning of the scaffolding. So they took the crane out and then lifted the beams and the glass in place from below. And here's another shot of the glass going in, and these glazers who look a little bit like rock climbers. And then as you saw in the early images, it's sort of a gray building. It's because it's clad with many scales of perforated aluminum for shading. There's a detailed shot of that, and also, to make the form. And here it is, again, from the inside in a different direction. And it's also, opaque from the outside, but through the perforated aluminum, you can see the sky from the inside. And you can even imagine in the grayest of winter days in Paris, that it's a joy to work in this space. And now our little cathedrals in New Caledonia. Actually, not that little. They're, the bigger ones were 100 feet tall. So with a single glue lamp is 100 feet tall. And so we're back to a glue lamp structure, but in this case, the wood that was used is Iroko, which is a West African wood, and it was chosen simply because of its good mechanical characteristics. It's termite resistance, it's dimensional stability, it takes well to lamination, and it's also good for machining, for the structural connections. And these two models, one's from the back, one's from the front, show a couple of things I want to point out. On the left side of the left image, you see the horizontal slats, and there's a different spacing between the slats as you go up the elevation. And also, you see a little bit better on the right-hand model that there's two layers of structure. There's an outer skin and then an inner skin. And this design was because of remember the concept sketch of playing with the wind? It was because we wanted to not only use the wind in a poetic way, but also in a practical sense for natural ventilation. So here are some of the schemes of winds at different speeds and different directions, and showing the idea that if you open and close louvers on the inside skin, you can adjust the pressure differential from the windward side and the leeward side and in the cavity. And you can adjust it in such a way that you can always ensure natural ventilation, no matter what the direction of the speed of the wind is, or close it completely if you have a cyclone. And this was a great idea, of course, but it's a bit of an invention, so it had to be tested. And we did that in a wind tunnel test with the smoke studies, and it worked. And it was because, again, of a lot of ingenuity And then eventually, we rationalized the structures into the two rings of glue lambs, and they are just simply connected by compression struts and tension rods. And here that is completed, looking down in between the two layers. And erection was fairly simple. The wood glue laminated beams were created in France and shipped to the site and erected as a kit of parts as you normally would. And here's a shot of the base connection where the two structural layers come together. And there was a cast connection that was inserted into the bottom of the beams with that were machined out, as I mentioned. The roof structures were pre-assembled, prefabricated, and hoisted into place in one piece. And of course, you probably forgot, but I'll remind you, on the sketch, there was also very important vegetation, and this is what I would call extreme gardening. This is probably 100-foot tall tree being transplanted as a Norfolk Island pine, which is indigenous to the area. I looked it up. Norfolk Island is just south of New Caledonia. And here, the buildings are again, sort of the assemblage of buildings in their natural habitat amongst their Norfolk Island pines. Now to New York City, and I'll just show you a bit about the Whitney Museum and how it was built. This is a little bit, I can show a little bit more detail because this was my baby for the last, for the 5 years prior to coming to Des Moines. So I can show you how we got from the sketches to the building. These are the type of sketches that we get when we talk to Renzo or he has a moment of playing or whatever. And I just want to point out, just briefly, you can see it. I love this particular one, there's many, but you can see that we work and he works in different scales at all the time, right? So you've got the elevation of the building and then the section, and then you're also thinking about how are these things going to connect to the building. If you're going with this type of fascia, what is the detail? What is the corner detail going to be? He was actually circling, these are the details we need to think about. So the final concept, after a long time of thinking and working, for the skin was to wrap the volumes, the sort of unique volumes of the building, to give a little bit of legibility. So when you're outside the building, you have a legibility that what's going on inside. And if you remember from the sketch, from the section, the upper part in green were the galleries, and that's sort of one volume. And then the lower part, the belly, is the offices and the volume. So we came to the conclusion that we should try to use these steel ribbons, long plates. And because of we wanted to wrap those volumes monolithically, our problem definition included 70-foot long steel sheets, and we didn't want to have any joints, so that we got that reading. Then we started creating some models, and in Italy, in Genoa, we have another building nearby where we need a bit more space, and we started building full-size mock-ups. And at that time, we were looking at what else is clad by metal. So we were looking at airstreams and tanks, and we built this mock-up that was kind of resembling an airstream, but we thought it's a little boring, it's not flat, it's not dynamic enough. So we came up with the idea of creating joints, open joints, and maybe even bending the edges of the wood, of the metal. This model is made out of wood. And the idea is it's a simple manipulation that's natural for steel, but you can see we were testing, if we do this simple move, we can catch light, create a shadow, create a thin line, and give us that vibration and texture that we get in the end. This is a shot, obviously, of the south elevation. And I'm going to show a little bit about how the steel plates were made, but I also want to just point out quickly the punch windows, simple cutouts of the steel plates. And from the inside, those windows look like this. This is actually on the west elevation, so they're a little longer, but in the library for the staff. But it's a simple interior finish. It's a glass fiber reinforced gypsum shell. And we had this idea, it's a little bit nautical, have curved corners to integrate the window shades. And I want to point out again that there's always complexity buried deep beneath simplicity. So for example, just the drawing that we create, us architects, during the construction documents phase, these are full-scale details, a plan and a section of the windows. And just like Renzo and Peter Rice were doing in the backyard, and I'm going to just explain very quickly. This is the horizontal section detail in between the windows, cutting between two windows. And these are drawn by us, the architects, and we have a vision, simple, rounded shapes on the inside. And you see at the bottom of the details outside, we have the bent edges of the steel, and on the inside are those cast GFRG shells. But we can't draw these things alone. We can't achieve our design idea or vision alone. To do this one detail, I needed input from the facade engineers, the fabricators, the erectors, the structural engineer, the general contractor, the interior trades. All of those people came together on this detail. What we have, just to explain it quickly, it's a unitized curtain wall system, so the rectangular pieces are 2 half mullions. The steel fascia panels were attached to that curtain wall system, and they included the glazing, the insulated glazing units. And interior to that was our interior finish, but it can't touch because the curtain wall system is hanging from the structure above, and the interior finish is sitting on the floor, so you have differential movements due to live loads, right, vertical. And also, we had a rigid interior finish, so the wind loads putting pressure and suction on the facade are going to push in and out, and we didn't want to push our interior finish, so we had to leave that space for that movement. And then a vertical section through the same window, but through the sill detail, might be hard to see, but there's a 1-inch dimension between the facade and the interior framing of the finish. And that 1 inch, that was like a magical number that took us forever to get to. Negotiating between tolerances and how much is the wind really going to push on this material, or on all the materials put together for the facade. And I just wanted to say, this is one example of how we can't do our jobs correctly, in my opinion, in our opinion, unless you have a very integrated team and an understanding of the environmental factors and forces and the difficulties of construction. I'm going to show back one more thing I want to point out. The screw on the outside of the facade was for a wind load clip, and I drew these dashed lines because we had to prove that you could get a screwdriver through the joint to screw it in. This is how we spend our lives. But it's more fun than I might be. So anyway, all of that to say, I just wanted to show something very simple and say, look, this is what you got to do to get it done. And you need a team, and you need practical experience and all that stuff that Herbert said. Now, back to the steel plates, because it's pretty fun. We had our problem, 70-foot long plates, no joints. I would go to meetings saying no joints. They would tell me not possible. I would remember my lesson and say we have to do it. And eventually, in this case, it was Joseph Gardner was a facade contractor out of Germany. And they eventually did some digging, and they found a company outside of Dresden, the eastern part of Germany, which makes sheet piles. And they had massive brake presses like this one. And they were able to bend the sheets. So here you can see some of the sheets coming out of the brake press. And we designed, based on our model, the angle of the bend, and they created a custom die for us, and they bent all the sheets. But then we still had our problem of the length, because we had 70-foot long panels, and the brake press was only 40 feet long. So this was where I am again now, transitioning from the poiesis to the technique. And we had to work very closely with the factory workers and the craftsmen to ensure our invisible joints, which meant a lot of trial and error, welding, and grinding, and eventually this process, a whole sequence of welding and grinding, and then reheating and cooling, to make sure that the joint was completely smooth and that the two plates would be flush. So when you introduce heat, the plates move up and down. And my role in this as the architect was going to the factory was not just to take nice pictures and to watch and learn, but was that role of conducting the orchestra. And the thing is, we, at least I, don't play these instruments. I don't play the welder and the grinder. So we have to rely on these guys, which are essentially our virtuosos. Eventually you get to what you hope for, which is a perfectly flat plate, you see with our straight edge, and which became an invisible joint. But we had even more complication. You remember the diagonal lines on Renzo's sketch? There's that we had steel panels that were wrapping those volumes. Because of the diagonal lines, I had to wrap around on the west side of the building on an angle. And we posed the problem, and the guys figured it out. They put the plates through the brake presses on an angle. They created jigs. And this is that sheet coming out of the paint shop. And I went to this factory probably about a dozen times throughout the project, checking on the production, looking for the joints, looking at, in this case, comparing the color of the paint. They were all painted by hand by a company that was painting race cars. And here we're comparing the two, from the new panel to the control to make sure it was all correct. And when it was, they would be put on these extra long crates and driven by fancy trucks to the Europort in Rotterdam, and eventually by boat across the ocean, and then to Jersey, across the river, across the bridge, across the river, to New York City to meet these guys, the erectors. And they had figured out, and there was, there's many layers of engineering that happened. So then there was a whole engineering team that had to create this custom designed and fabricated suction cup rig robot, which lifts the panels out of the cradle and then rotated them in midair with a remote control, and then hung the panels on the building. And these panels were all supported at the top. They're dead load clips at the top, and then only, if you remember the screw, just wind load clips along the edges in the joints to allow for thermal expansion and contraction. All figured out by the team. And in the end, you do that many, many times, and you get the result. These are the 3D panels on the west elevation. And you see the vibration in the elevation from the open joints and the bent edges. And just to summarize for us, the Renzo Piano Building Workshop method is this way of following the projects all the way from concept to completion in great detail. And we do that because not only we love it, but also because we think it's the only way to really ensure that you achieve your poetic vision. And perhaps more importantly, it's the only way to learn from each project and apply those lessons to the next one. So keeping all that in mind, I want to spend the last few minutes on our project down the street, the Krause Gateway Center. And this project is nearing completion, and there's a couple of people, maybe more than a couple from the team here, which is great to see. They're taking the time off, so we're probably ahead of schedule. Right? But no, really, I'm going to show a few slides, and I hope this doesn't give any of us any anxiety. But even these, for our little team, I hope that we can just look at this, and as I did when I was putting it together, and just celebrate how far we've come since we started working together in 2015. So here's the site, downtown Des Moines, across to the north side of the Papa John Sculpture Park. And Wellmark is the building to our right. And in the very early days, there was Renzo and Giorgio, the partner in charge of the project, creating these early sketches and plan on the top and elevation or section below. And just thinking of the simple ideas, looking for that poetic potential in the site and in the client and in the program. And we're also thinking we want to create a uniquely Iowan building and a uniquely Iowan space. And we found that when we came here, there's a certain vastness and, open space. And you have beautiful skies and these really, infinite horizons. And we thought we could marry those environmental qualities with the civic qualities of the Kum Go stores, which are serving hundreds of thousands of people every week, I think, and all with very good customer service. And here's to plug that in. And here's a sketch. I think that here's a sketch from Georgia, one of Georgia's trips, I think, at the very beginning. And I like it because it's very conceptual, but it goes to show that we think beyond the site. We've got to think, way to the north, looking at the grade change. And you see we've already stolen the sculpture park to be part of our project. And we were thinking, the ideas that came to our minds were the ideas of horizontality and unobstructed views, and even an idea of this flying island prairie. And in site plan, we were thinking about everything around the site, and looking at it and thinking, how can we make it better? So we looked at the sculpture park and we said, this is a great place. It's a very good gift to the city. You see these beautiful sculptures, and you walk under the sun. I see a lot of kids running around. There was a moment a couple years ago where everybody was playing Pokemon Go. I'm kind of glad that phase is over. But we thought, hey, we can use our project to complement that experience at the sculpture park. And in fact, we can create something that has shade and places to sit, and the two can work together. And our building, Krause Gateway Center, only takes up 25% of the site area, which means that 75% of the site is given back to the public. And that 75% is probably half of that, which is underneath the long overhangs or underneath the tree canopies. So while it's not a public building, we, and through conversations with our client, we thought it was important to use it as an excuse to make public space and make the downtown area better as a byproduct, like I said earlier, to what we were doing. So in the end of the design phase, we landed at this image, which is these ideas of horizontal planes, very thin, flying floor plates, a very transparent ground floor, so that the sidewalks don't feel closed in, and then when you're walking by, you can see people working inside, and people inside can look out at the public and the sculpture park. And the many trees that are being planted as we speak in our various little mini parks. And here's a section. There's a section running north-south, so you see the grade change from Ingersoll Avenue to Grand Avenue on the left or the right. And the office floors are above the three sort of white floors. And we have our flying short grass island prairie above that on the 6th level. And a little glass pavilion in the middle of the prairie that we all call our metaphysical place. It's been a word we've been using for about 3 years. And it was important to maintain that north-south transparency. So you can see here, you enter the building from the upper side of Ingersoll. You can go right in and see right into the sculpture park. And from the sculpture park, you can see right through the building. So the building itself is not a barrier. And here's a shot from construction from a little while ago, but I like it because you get the sense of the vastness of the space of the lobby. But also, you can see very clearly here, now everything's covered up, but just look at the teamwork. You've got the HVAC contractor weaving all the ductwork through the beams, and the interior finishes, the framing for the ceiling is sucked up as tight as possible to get our idea of the thin floor plates. And here is a shot on the 5th floor, showing the wide open, unobstructed views and those long overhangs and the structure pulled back from the facade. and then at the end of deep sun penetration late in the day. And finally, I'm going to leave you with a little time-lapse video of the construction that I just grabbed from our webcam. And while it's playing, use the opportunity to thank our client, Kum Go, and also our team. And half of them, a lot of them are here today. We work with OPN Architects, our partner, and Confluence Landscape Design. But I just want to, the list goes on. We've got Ryan Companies, who's building the building, Baker Group, HVAC, Waldinger, Electric, Morrissey Engineering, Silman Structure, Air Lighting Designers. Front was our facade consultant working with Architectural Wall Systems who built the facade. Lejeune did the steel. Saxton's installing furniture right now. The list goes on forever. But the point is, what I wanted to make was that these are hundreds, if not thousands of people that came together with us to build this little building. And hopefully create a little bit of poetry in Des Moines and keep our promise to civility. And when it's all done pretty shortly, prove that we all know a little bit about constructability. Thank you very much.
Oftentimes we allow questions from the audience at this point. It has been a long day, and we understand that, but if you do have any, please offer them right now, or we can do it individually afterwards, so it's up to you.
Any questions? Sure.
Something that I found really compelling was programs that are not in service that also tied in with your point in the very beginning of the lecture that described providing an atmosphere in which a child may feel more comfortable and more excited about school. So what I took from that was the power of the human experience in these spaces and the psychology of those spaces. So I was wondering, as you get into the project, what is the process to first address take on the human experience, which is something that's always subjective and not really measured?
Yeah, I told you, you have to close your eyes and imagine, that's what my boss tells me. Right? Yes. I don't know. Honestly, I think every architect has their process. Architects should live until they're 200 years old because you don't figure it out until you're 75. There's no formula, but I think there's a couple things that I've learned, and I'm still young in my career, to be honest. And things that I've learned is one, like I said, it's about people. So you've got to look around. You've got to travel and look around, and you've got to think about, you sort of have to observe yourself in places and then make a mental note. Oh, that was really something, you know. And what was, the scale of that place didn't make me feel very good. It's not just, 10-foot ceiling, that's what we're going to do, commercial space, 10-foot ceilings. No, it's something you got to think beyond that. So I think observing your own interactions with spaces and also traveling and looking at buildings and just immerse yourself into society, and then you learn things, and then you'll find your own way, and you'll find what's important to you, and then you become your own architect, and then you do what you do and make the world a better place. Any easier questions? Yes. Sorry.
You showed a few photos of the model shop. Could you maybe speak on the process of model making or the tectonics and then the design process in the suite?
Yeah, so model, it's a big deal for us. Our model shop, we have another, actually, we have a really nice one in Paris, our Paris office as well. I guess it's a little different in our office than others because we have model makers, professional guys that just make models, that's what they do. And they are part of our design process. And we sort of, in a way, we have two model shops. We have like a model shop that's not as fancy for young architects and interns where we're creating very conceptual, quick models. And then we move out of that and we start producing drawings and giving them to the model makers and working with the model makers. So in a way, it's a mini version of construction, but also these guys, like I was saying about the other factory workers, they're virtuosos. These guys are excellent model makers and they know how to build things. And they also know about proportion, they know how to put things together. I mean, the Whitney model, I was so impressed many years ago now, but when they built the Whitney models, about this big, 1/4 inch to a foot scale probably, and they were building the internal structure, not the way the building would be made, but the first thing they did was build internal structure and then build a model around that. And that's not how I built my models in school. I was building it from the outside in, hoping never getting into the inside, just doing whatever people wanted to see. So the process, I guess, it's just, it's a very important part of our overall process, so we put a lot of effort into it. And we have dedicated people. We schedule them. This guy's working on this project for the next 3 weeks. We've got something coming up. And we make these great models, and the architects work with the model makers to build a little version of our building, and then we go on and build the big version. Yes?
Tell us about your clients, because what you've shown us is clients who will pay for all of this, almost like Boeing building an airplane. Everybody's on the same team, as you said. Or do you have any other clients that do the typical, where you have to bid something first and have all these people in place? Right.
Definitely, we're a little privileged, I would say. But also, I think it's very important that, don't think that we don't have budget problems and money discussions and schedule discussions and all the usual things. But what we do have, and I don't even remember who said this, it might have been another person like Frank Gate or something. I remember there was a quote where the architect also has to choose their clients, right? So sometimes you shouldn't work for some clients that don't get it. Some clients, and you don't have to always spend the most amount of money. When we've done projects that were less expensive or more expensive, but architecture is not about how much money you put it in. I think it's about a way of working and the concepts. And some clients that say, I just want it on the cheap, I don't care, that they're not respecting our service. So then, go and do something else, get a prefabricated building or something. Because one thing that we really feel at our office, and it comes from the top, is that we're valuable. And if the client doesn't see that value, then we shouldn't work with them. But part of that value is that discussion. So the client also has to say, okay, we are invested in the project too, and we'll come to the table and we'll have our workshop meetings and we'll talk to you. There's a lot of decisions that we make in this building and the Whitney Museum and all of our projects that weren't our ideas. In fact, I have many, but another quote that I remember from Renzo probably for the rest of my life was that the best thing about teamwork is that you don't keep track of who had the idea. And, a lot of times it comes from the client, but they need to be, ready to engage with that. Yes?
I'm taking a group of students next week to Houston, and we're actually studying spiritual space, but one of the buildings we want to go to is the Side Homily Gallery.
Yeah.
That is not exactly a recent building, but immaculately detailed. To the point of almost lapidary precision. It's like a jeweler was hired to make a building.
Yeah.
And watching your detail this evening, when here's where the screwdriver's got to go in order to put the
It's a
building.
bit of a perversion.
It feels pretty similar on a gigantic scale, and I'm wondering if that kind of sensibility that holds true for most of the buildings that you do.
Every building. I'll tell you, look, Renzo comes from a family of builders, like I said. Renzo tells me sometimes what bolts to use. it's coming from the top. It's coming from the entire DNA of our office. We like to build buildings. We love the process of construction. And I don't want anybody to think that those details, it's easy to draw one, but those details are created by us. There's some Ryan Companies guys here, I think, guys building our building. I was just on the building all week, and part of the job, which maybe I could have mentioned here, but I'll mention it now, the architect is to inspire people to do their best. And I'm on the project, and I'm seeing guys, and Joe's working with us, talking to guys that are laying floor, stone, and doing millwork details, and they're proud of their work. And that, I don't want to take credit for that necessarily, but if you put that atmosphere into the building and you take pride in the architectural work that you do, and it kind of transcends into the people, and then buildings like that get created because everybody along the chain is proud and says, yeah, this is something I'm doing that's important and going to last for centuries. The idea that we have in North America that buildings, it's a 50-year building, tear it down, move it. I don't think that's right. And we try to do buildings with that mentality. They're going to last for multiple centuries. And beyond the current client, we have a client, but they're not going to be around all the time. The building will be. So we have these conversations of what's the bigger picture, inspire that we're doing something special, and then you get workers that are sitting there cutting wood and doing it all perfectly because they're proud of it. But thanks for noticing. We're real proud. Yes?
Do you think that when you think as program makers and architects, the right way to do it, or do you think it's kind of part of the spectrum? Also, like theoretical architects who do more drawing, kind of do that. Do you think it's like the correct way to do it, or do you think you're more like a piece of puzzle?
The way we do architecture?
Yeah, the way you.
Okay, yeah, I'm not sure if I totally heard the first part of your question, but I think we're doing our way. We learn from many other people. So it's not like we don't have a lot of books, and we don't look at other buildings, and we don't talk to, Renzo's got a lot of good friends who are very good architects, and we're influenced by everybody, and so these are our core values, but absolutely, we're a small piece of the overall picture. You can have somebody come in here and talk about stuff that we aren't capable of doing. I had the luxury of choosing what I was going to speak about, so I focus on our strengths. But there's a lot of stuff out there that we learn from, and absolutely, we're just a small piece. Yes?
The way you guys do construction, like a lot of this stuff is intricate.
Yeah.
The way you guys do like the different details and whatnot. And I just wonder, when do you guys think about that within the design process? So, does it come up early? Does it come up kind of during maybe construction?
After, like I was saying about I was giving that analogy about poetry and language. In one hand, it's our language, right? Everybody has their language. And the details that we have, if you start to look at our projects, you can start to pick out other projects that may have been designed by the studio. So it's partly like these are the words that we use to tell our stories. And I can, once you're doing it long enough and, double post handrail and align the joint in the ceiling to the column, to the base, to the floor, to the toilet. That's just part of the language. But, I think it's not just for fun, but it shows a lot of thoughtfulness, and it exposes the craftsmanship of the people putting the building together. But there's also another way. Frank Gehry does a whole different type of craftsmanship and thoughtfulness. And it's looser in a way, right? You're familiar with his fish sculptures, and it's looser, but it's just a different way. But this is for us. This is like in our DNA. I sleep and dream about lining joints, and now I think there's architects in Des Moines that are doing the same thing after 50 years with us.
I would like to take a personal indulgence and thank Brian Clark of Ryan Company, the contractor on the project, for helping actually round up Kevin and get him connected and having him come and speak with us today. It's been a great pleasure and honor to have Kevin join us. And again, please give him one last pile of greetings.